Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and this one is going to weave about a bit. So we'll start with just under a year ago, July 2018, the Chequers meeting. Theresa May's cabinet met to discuss the European Union withdrawal agreement, and the message that came out of the meeting was that cabinet had agreed to the Brexit plan and was preparing to sell it to Parliament in Westminster. But David Davis, the Brexit secretary, who thought he was going to get us that great unicorn deal, had actually failed spectacularly, but didn't want to be held responsible for what was actually the reality of Brexit. The following day he resigned, saying that he couldn't support the agreement. It was essentially as a result of how unpopular the reality of Brexit was going to be that caused Davis to jump ship. Remember, by this time, the Brexiteers had moved from their pre-referendum campaign for this great close union with the EU to, no, we don't want anything at all, complete break. The resignation also bounced Boris Johnson into resigning. Johnson was a vocal advocate of membership of the EU for many years, and even running into the main Brexit campaign, this was still his view. But as the referendum came nearer, he jumped ship to the Brexiteer side as he felt there was a political opportunity. David Cameron had already said that he didn't intend to see out another full term in office, so there was going to be a leadership election before the next general election, and Boris Johnson wanted to be the next Prime Minister. Johnson was convinced that Remain would win the referendum. After all, how could it not? Brexit was bonkers on every level, as he had described in various newspaper articles and interviews over the years. But that divide on Europe would always be in his party, and the Eurosceptics were getting boisterous. By championing a failure of a Brexit campaign, he could rally the anti-EU MPs in his party to his side. Such views would also be popular with the wider membership. He thought it was his best chance of being elected the next leader. It was very much the same thing as Nigel Farage. I've no doubt he looked at Nigel Farage and said, this guy's constantly attacking the EU, and yet he's in sort of power with it because he's got his European seat. He's happy with that. He's getting money from that. Yeah, this can work. Actually staying in the EU, but saying that we should leave it, but actually I can't do it. I've got the power to do it. Someone else. That works. But then, of course, the unthinkable happened. Leave won. In no small part due to his own illegal campaign. He still tried to stand for leadership, but was quickly abandoned as too divisive in favour of Theresa May. And so it was that last July, faced with a situation whereby the hardline Brexiteers would not accept May's deal and where he'd staked his political future on being a Brexiteer figurehead, Boris Johnson showed his leadership qualities by following David Davis's lead. But it was no good just quietly resigning and blaming the Prime Minister as Davis had done. He needed to still make sure that he was the rallying point for all those Brexiteers. He went back to writing for the Daily Telegraph, something he'd stopped whilst Foreign Secretary, and plugged the Believe in Britain message again, something that he had done before the referendum itself. At the end of the Brexit campaign, going back a bit now, Boris Johnson gave a speech as one of the leaders of the Leave campaign, again presenting himself as that main figurehead. And it was reported at the time to have been written in consultation with Steve Bannon. Johnson denied this, but in an article in The Observer today, related to a recorded discussion where the recording has now been released, the truth has come out as Steve Bannon discusses how he helped Boris Johnson write that speech. A journalist is quizzing Steve Bannon on his role in preparing the speech. I'll link it in the description below if you haven't seen it. Now, one of Boris Johnson's main pitches to be Conservative Party leader is that he can head off the threat posed by Nigel Farage and his Brexit party. This is what the Conservatives now fear as much as Corbyn. In fact, potentially more so in the short term, as Corbyn has shown that he's not really an electoral asset to the Labour Party. But Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage are effectively working together. They both have the same paymasters. They both have the same people pushing them. The two have been photographed together a few times. They try to keep the meetings as few and far between as possible to maintain the illusion that they are political opponents. But they are frequently seen with various agencies in common. Generally people close to either Trump or Putin or both. People are increasingly calling Boris Johnson Britain's piss-poor version of Donald Trump. But if they both had their strategies determined by the same people for the same purpose, then it shouldn't really come as any surprise at all. And with both Johnson and Farage being talked about in the same sentence by President Trump as the people who should be running Britain, how does anyone not seriously connect it all up? Steve Bannon's work is a major threat to Europe in the same way as it has been in the United States. It could be argued that the US is well on the way to being conquered by his outright campaign, that the UK is the next to fall, and that the rest of Europe is also in their sights. But he's not working alone, of course. He has coordinated not only with Russian oligarchs, we know about that, and far-right Republicans, again, we know about that, but also conservatives in the UK. He recently moved into a monastery in Italy, not to train as a monk, but to train the outright leaders of tomorrow. That was its specified purpose. This academy, although calling it that seems like an assault on the English language, was partly set up by conservatives from the UK. Bannon was to be the figurehead, the dean of the college, so to speak. Now, Italy have kicked him out of basically. They've withdrawn the rights of this group to use it on technicalities, not because of what they wanted to use it for. They can't do that. But they have the money and they will just relocate. And be mindful of where it was. It wasn't built in the UK or even in the US. It was built in Italy, a committed member of the EU. Their next target is other EU countries. They've been drawing together various anti-EU parties in the European Parliament. They're all obviously as nationalists. They're not really going to work with each other naturally because, you know, the nationalists in Britain are all about, oh, Britain is best. The nationalists in France all about France is best. Nationalists in Holland all about Holland is best. Sorry, Netherlands, whatever. Get it right. But they're being coordinated now. They've been brought together for that common purpose, something they wouldn't ordinarily have done themselves. It is a coordinated and well-financed campaign of populism in order to break up Western civilization. Not to shift power eastwards, although that is why Putin is getting involved, of course, why he's so happy to help out, but to restore an extreme right-wing white supremacist ideology from what they see as the ashes of liberalism and socialism in Europe. The thinking of these groups is that Germany and Italy failed in their fascism not because of their ideology, but just because they weren't strong enough. They didn't have the military might to triumph. So don't fight a military campaign, fight a war of words. Convince the populations of these united countries that they will be stronger on their own. Against all reason, tell them that they are stronger alone in a group. Quite how this makes sense to a species that has evolved to be a pack animal, I'll leave to the sociologists and psychologists. But somehow, that's the message that's been plugged and been received. Do that with enough countries and you break up those alliances. Do it with enough countries and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Brexiteers talking about the EU failing despite it clearly growing in both influence and wealth. But if enough countries pull out, then of course it will fail. Take players from the best team in any sport in the world and that team will fail. Unity is strength, and the more that unity is fractured, the more the strength is lost. And this is what we should fear. And by we, I mean citizens of moderate Western democracies, not just people in Britain or in America. Brexit is the most pressing concern for those of us in the UK and Ireland, and also other parts of Europe. But it's just another stepping stone on the march of the alt-right. In fact, it might almost be seen as a distraction away from the real danger. Brexit doesn't need to happen now to promote their interests. In fact, if I was going to guess, and it would just be a guess, I'd say that Bannon is more than happy with the current state of limbo. One of the three most powerful nations in the EU has a fractured relationship with the others. That weakens it. And yet not leaving doesn't expose the full horrors of populism to others who haven't yet marched on that path. Yeah, so to those who refuse to look at the damage it's already done to the UK, they continue to say that the golden age is coming as soon as we leave. The reason the damage has been done is because we haven't left yet. And while everyone is pointing at laughing at how dumb Britain is right now, not unfairly I have to concede, that same groundwork is being laid elsewhere in Europe as well. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, and until next time, I'll see you later.